There is a strange and deeply isolating phenomenon that happens the moment you actually start getting better. You spend years reading, going to therapy, doing the heavy emotional lifting, and finally, you begin to shed the toxic habits that have kept you stuck. You start setting boundaries. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You no longer tolerate the passive-aggressive comments at family gatherings, and you politely step back from the one-sided friendships that have drained your energy for a decade. You feel lighter. You feel a quiet sense of self-respect taking root. You think, finally, I am healing. But when you look around for the applause, or even just a baseline level of understanding from the people in your life, you are met with something entirely different. A coldness. A subtle hostility. The whispered conversations behind your back that eventually make their way to you. They aren't saying they are proud of you. They are saying you have changed, and not in a good way. They are saying you have become difficult. They are saying you think you are better than everyone else. They are calling you arrogant. This is one of the most painful cognitive dissonances a person can experience. You know, fundamentally, that you are acting out of self-preservation and newfound self-worth. Yet the feedback loop from your environment is aggressively telling you that you are doing something wrong, that your healing is somehow an offensive act. In American society, this friction is amplified to a deafening volume. We live in a culture that is obsessed with the aesthetic of wellness, but deeply hostile to the actual practice of it. We love the idea of self-care when it means buying a bath bomb or taking a yoga class, but the moment self-care looks like saying no to an unreasonable demand at work or refusing to participate in toxic family gossip during Thanksgiving, the culture pushes back hard. In the hyper-connected, relentlessly social landscape of modern America, your value is often measured by your availability and your compliance. The American ideal, particularly in corporate environments and suburban social circles, is the ultimate team player, the person who goes along to get along, the one who swallows their own discomfort to keep the peace. When you stop playing that game, you disrupt a delicate, unspoken social contract. To understand why your personal growth feels like a personal attack to the people around you, we have to look past the surface-level hurt and examine the mechanics of human psychology. And no one mapped this specific terrain more accurately than the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Long before the internet, long before the modern wellness industry, Jung understood the brutal cost of becoming an individual. He observed that society does not actually want you to be whole, society wants you to be predictable. Society requires you to wear a mask. Jung called this mask the persona. The word originates from Latin, referring to the theatrical masks worn by actors in ancient Rome to signify their roles. In the context of your life, the persona is the version of you that you constructed to survive in your specific environment. It is the hyper-agreeable employee who takes on extra work without complaining. It is the peacemaking sibling who diffuses tension at the expense of their own voice. It is the funny, self-deprecating friend who never asks for emotional support but is always there to give it. For a long time, your persona worked. It kept you safe, it kept you employed, and it kept you invited to dinner parties. But the cost of maintaining a persona that does not align with your true self is a quiet, devastating internal decay. It leads to burnout, anxiety, resentment, and a profound sense of emptiness. When you finally reach your breaking point and decide to heal, what you are actually doing in Jungian terms is beginning the process of individuation. You are choosing to strip away the false layers of the persona and integrate your true thoughts, feelings, and boundaries into your waking life. You are deciding that your internal reality is more important than external validation. But here is the critical piece that no one warns you about. Your social circle, your family, your co-workers, they do not have a relationship with the new, healing version of you. They have a 10 or 20-year contract with your persona. Their own comfort, their own sense of control, and in some cases, their own emotional survival is entirely dependent on you playing your assigned role. The friend who uses you as a dumping ground for their endless drama relies on your inability to say no. The family member who controls the dynamic through guilt relies on your deep-seated people-pleasing trauma to keep the system functioning. When you suddenly change the rules of engagement, when you look them in the eye and say, "I cannot do this anymore," you are not just setting a boundary. You are dismantling the infrastructure of their reality. In the American psychological landscape, where extroversion and perpetual accommodation are championed, withdrawing your energy to protect your peace is instantly pathologized. When you stop showing up to every optional networking event because you need rest, you are not seen as grounded, you are seen as aloof. When you decline to answer work emails at 9 o'clock at night, you are not seen as having healthy boundaries, you are viewed as not being a team player. When you stop over-explaining yourself and simply say, "No, that does not work for me," the brevity of your truth is interpreted as hostility. Why? Because people are terrified of the space you have suddenly created. This brings us to the most volatile reaction you will face during your healing journey. The accusation of arrogance. Arrogance is defined as an exaggerated sense of one's own importance or abilities. But when you are healing, you are not exaggerating your importance, you are finally elevating it to baseline zero. You are simply demanding the basic respect and autonomy that you should have had all along. So why is it called arrogance? Because to a person who benefits from you having zero boundaries, your newfound self-respect looks like a violent rebellion. If they have spent years looking down on you, or relying on your submissiveness to feel powerful, you standing up straight forces them to recalibrate their entire worldview. They cannot look inward and say, "Oh, I have been taking advantage of this person and now they are setting healthy limits." That requires a level of self-awareness and accountability that most people are desperately trying to avoid. Instead, the ego protects itself through projection. It is much easier for them to rewrite the narrative. They tell themselves, and everyone else, that you have become conceited. That you read a few psychology books and now you think you are superior. They take your quiet strength and frame it as a loud insult. This is the exact moment where so many people abandon their healing. The pressure of being misunderstood, the threat of being ostracized, the sheer exhaustion of having your motives constantly questioned becomes too much. The gravity of the old persona pulls them back in. They apologize. They drop the boundaries. They go back to being the nice person, sacrificing their soul to regain the approval of the collective. But if you understand what is actually happening underneath the surface of these accusations, everything changes. You begin to realize that their reaction is not a diagnosis of your character. It is a confession of their own psychological state. Carl Jung warned us that whoever looks outside dreams, but whoever looks inside awakes. The tragedy is that most people are terrified of waking up. When they encounter someone who is in the active, messy, unapologetic process of waking up, it triggers a profound disturbance in their own psyche. You become a walking mirror, reflecting back to them all the compromises they have made, all the boundaries they have failed to set, and all the pain they have buried under their own heavy personas. Your healing is a spotlight on their stagnation. And rather than face their own shadows, they choose to attack your light. We are standing at the edge of a massive psychological paradox. You are doing the bravest thing a human being can do, which is to construct a life based on truth rather than compliance. Yet, you are being treated like a villain. This is the systemic friction of individuation. The question is no longer why they think you are arrogant. The question is, what exact psychological mechanisms are they using to defend themselves against your growth? What is the architecture of this projection, and how do you navigate this minefield without losing your newfound self? To understand that, we have to look at the darkest, most hidden part of the human mind. We have to look at what Jung called the shadow, and how your healing is forcing the people around you to stare directly into theirs. To truly understand why your evolution feels like a threat to the people around you, we have to examine a concept that Carl Jung considered the cornerstone of human psychology. He called it the shadow. The shadow is not inherently evil, though popular culture often misinterprets it that way. In Jungian psychology, the shadow simply represents all the parts of ourselves that we have repressed, denied, or hidden away because they were deemed unacceptable by our families, our schools, and our culture. From a very young age in American society, you are taught a highly specific curriculum of compliance. You are taught that being agreeable is identical to being good. You are taught that anger is always destructive, that setting a firm limit is selfish, and that prioritizing your own mental bandwidth over the demands of the group is a moral failure. So, what happens to your natural human instinct to protect yourself? What happens to your healthy anger? What happens to your right to say no? It does not disappear. It gets shoved down into the unconscious mind. It becomes the shadow. Every single adult walking around a modern American city is dragging a massive, heavy shadow behind them. They are exhausted, they are overextended, and they are silently suffocating under the weight of their own personas. They go to jobs they resent, answering emails on weekends because they are terrified of falling behind in a hyper-competitive economy. They attend suburban social functions and family holidays they secretly dread, smiling through gritted teeth because the cultural script dictates that keeping the peace is more important than telling the truth. They have entirely disowned their own capacity to set boundaries. And because they have repressed this power within themselves, they are completely unequipped to handle it when they see it externalized in you. When you start healing, you do something radical. You begin to integrate your shadow. You stop being the perpetually nice, unconditionally accommodating character in their movie. You start using the word no as a complete sentence. You start taking up space. And when you do this, you inadvertently become a walking, breathing trigger for everyone around you who is still trapped by their own compliance. This is where the psychological mechanism known as projection takes over. Projection is an ego defense mechanism where a person unconsciously transfers their own unacceptable thoughts, feelings, or traits onto someone else. It is a way for the human brain to avoid the excruciating pain of self-reflection. Imagine a family dynamic or a corporate office as a delicate, interconnected mobile hanging over a crib. For years, you were the heavyweight on one side that kept the entire structure balanced. You were the shock absorber. When your manager threw an unreasonable deadline at the team, you stayed late and absorbed the anxiety. When your mother or father initiated a cycle of guilt and manipulation, you absorbed the emotional fallout to keep the family dinner from turning into a war zone. The entire system relied on your lack of boundaries to maintain its homeostasis. But healing means you finally cut your string and step away from the mobile. Instantly, the entire system is thrown into chaos. The remaining parts start crashing into each other. The people left behind suddenly have to deal with their own unresolved trauma, their own toxic behaviors, and their own unmanaged anxiety because you are no longer there to process it for them. They are in pain, and they are disoriented. But it is psychologically devastating for them to admit, "I am angry because you are no longer letting me use you." It is too painful for them to realize, "I resent you because you had the courage to set a boundary that I am too terrified to set in my own life." The ego cannot survive that level of brutal honesty. So, the ego builds a narrative to protect itself. Instead of recognizing their own dysfunction, they project the problem onto you. They look at your newfound self-respect and they label it arrogance. They look at your quiet distance and they label it a superiority complex. By framing you as the villain, by convincing themselves and others that you have simply become selfish and conceited, they absolve themselves of any responsibility to change. This projection is incredibly aggressive in American culture because our society commodifies self-sacrifice. We idolize the hustle culture mentality that demands endless output, and we romanticize the kind of toxic loyalty that requires you to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. When you step out of that paradigm, you are not just challenging a relationship, you are challenging the foundational mythology of the culture itself. You are proving that it is possible to survive and thrive without participating in the collective exhaustion. For someone who has built their entire identity around being a martyr to their job or their family, seeing you choose peace feels like an invalidation of their entire life's work. Your healing feels like a mirror reflecting their own wasted energy. This is the exact reason why the pushback you receive often takes the form of moral outrage. They will try to pull you back into the old dynamic not by asking nicely, but by weaponizing guilt. They will use phrases designed to strike directly at your empathy. They will say things like, "After everything we have done for you," or "I guess you are just too good for us now," or "You used to be so sweet, I do not know who you are anymore." These are not objective observations about your character. These are tactical psychological strikes. They are desperate attempts by a destabilized system to force you back into your designated role. They are trying to make the cost of your healing so socially expensive, so deeply uncomfortable, that you will voluntarily put the mask back on just to make the accusation stop. The label of arrogance is the ultimate tool of social control. When someone calls you arrogant, what they are really saying is, "You are no longer shrinking to make me feel big. You are no longer dimming your light so that my darkness feels comfortable." Jung understood that the path to true psychological maturity, the path to individuation, is inherently a lonely one, precisely because it requires you to abandon the comfort of the herd. The herd operates on consensus and conformity. Healing operates on truth and radical self-responsibility. The two cannot coexist peacefully. As you continue to strip away the conditioning, as you continue to build a life based on your actual needs rather than their expectations, the friction will not magically disappear. The projections might even get louder. But recognizing the mechanics behind the noise changes how you hear it. You stop internalizing their accusations. You realize that their anger is not a reflection of your failure, but a confirmation that your boundaries are finally working. You are no longer speaking the language of their dysfunction, and so, naturally, they cannot understand you. The question then becomes, how do you sustain this? How do you survive the social wilderness that comes with being profoundly misunderstood, and how do you build a new reality on the other side of this transition? Surviving the social wilderness of your own healing requires a fundamental shift in how you process external feedback. You have spent your entire life functioning as a mirror for other people's comfort, reflecting back the version of reality they wanted to see. Now that the mirror is broken, you have to build an internal compass that does not rely on their validation. The first and most critical step in this phase of individuation is the radical acceptance of being the villain in someone else's story. In a culture that heavily incentivizes public approval and likability, particularly in the American hyper-networked economy where your reputation often dictates your professional and social survival, accepting the villain role feels incredibly dangerous. It triggers a primal fear of being abandoned by the tribe. But stepping into that fear is the only pathway to psychological freedom. You have to actively mourn the loss of the good person badge. That badge was always a trap. It was an award given to you by a dysfunctional system in exchange for your silence, your compliance, and your ultimate exhaustion. When they call you arrogant, when they whisper that you have changed, your immediate biological instinct will be to defend yourself, to explain your boundaries, to logically prove that you are still a good, caring person. You must resist this urge completely. Explaining your healing to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you is just another covert form of people-pleasing. It is you trying to manage their emotional reality for them. The most powerful thing you can do when faced with their projection is to offer absolutely nothing but a neutral, grounded presence. Let them be angry. Let them be disappointed. Let them think you are arrogant. Their perception of you is no longer your responsibility to manage. As you implement this strategy of neutral observation, you will start to notice a massive shift in your baseline energy reserves. The sheer amount of cognitive bandwidth you used to spend analyzing how everyone else was feeling in a room, calculating how to phrase an email so you did not sound too aggressive, or twisting yourself into psychological knots to avoid disappointing a family member, is suddenly returned to your own nervous system. This is the physiological payoff of Carl Jung's individuation. You are retrieving the vital energy that was bound up in hiding your shadow and maintaining your persona, and you are finally channeling it into your actual, authentic life. But this personal awakening is not happening in an isolated vacuum. If we zoom out and look at the broader macroeconomic and social landscape of the United States today, we are witnessing this exact psychological friction playing out on a massive, systemic scale. We are currently living through a period of intense cultural reckoning regarding work, boundaries, and individual identity. Look at the economic phenomena that have defined the American workforce over the last few years. Movements heavily documented by the media, such as the Great Resignation or the trend of quiet quitting, are almost always framed by corporate institutions and traditional pundits as a crisis of laziness, a sudden collapse of the American work ethic, or a symptom of an entitled generation. But viewed through a Jungian analytical lens, these are not economic failures, they are symptoms of mass individuation. Millions of Americans are waking up to the reality that the historic social contract of the American dream, the promise that infinite self-sacrifice, chronic stress, and the total abandonment of personal boundaries would eventually be rewarded with unquestionable security and happiness, is fundamentally broken. The system requires endless, exponential growth, and for decades, that growth was subsidized by the unmanaged anxiety and the hyper-compliant personas of the working and middle classes. Now, people are collectively setting a boundary. They are refusing to answer the Slack messages at 8 in the evening. They are prioritizing their central nervous systems over corporate loyalty. They are demanding that their worth be decoupled from their economic output. And how is the macro system reacting? Exactly the same way a toxic family system reacts when you set a personal boundary. The corporate infrastructure and the traditional institutions project their panic outward. They label the shifting workforce as difficult, ungrateful, and yes, arrogant. The macro reaction is identical to the micro reaction. The system is terrified of the space created by a population that is no longer willing to shrink to keep the machine running smoothly. This means that your individual choice to heal, to establish firm boundaries, and to prioritize your authenticity over your compliance is not just a personal victory. It is an act of quiet, radical rebellion against a societal structure that inherently profits from your depletion. But how do you navigate the day-to-day reality of this rebellion without becoming entirely isolated and bitter? The goal of Jungian individuation is not to become a hermit, hiding away from the world in a fortress of solitude to protect your peace. The actual goal is to be able to stand firmly in the chaotic center of the world, deeply engaged with society, but completely untethered from its neuroses and demands. You do this by deliberately cultivating a new tribe, but this time, the criteria for entry is entirely different. You are no longer looking for people who share your unhealed wounds, you are looking for people who share your capacity for truth. In the beginning of this transition, your social circle will inevitably shrink. The relationships that were built exclusively on your willingness to be a doormat or a crisis manager will disintegrate, and you must let them go without chasing them. This period of isolation is deeply uncomfortable, but it is a mathematically necessary void. You cannot attract authentic, balanced connections while you are still taking up all the space in your life with superficial, draining ones. As you hold your ground and refuse to lower your standards, a strange and beautiful thing begins to happen. The people who are also doing the heavy emotional lifting, the people who have integrated their own shadows and discarded their own heavy personas, will begin to recognize you. They will not be threatened by your boundaries, they will respect them because they understand the cost of building them. They will not view your self-worth as a display of arrogance, they will view it as a baseline requirement for mutual respect. You will slowly begin to build a network of relationships that are not based on trauma bonding, mutual complaining, or codependent compliance, but on actual, conscious choice. The transition from the old reality to the new one requires immense psychological stamina. There will be days when the isolation feels unbearable, and the temptation to revert to your old, accommodating self just to feel a fleeting sense of belonging will be overwhelming. During those moments of doubt, you have to remind yourself of the stark mathematics of the situation. You can either be universally liked by a large group of people who do not actually know you and do not care about your well-being, or you can be deeply loved and respected by a few people, including yourself, who know the absolute, unvarnished truth of who you are. You cannot have both. The American cultural narrative will constantly try to sell you the illusion that you can be everything to everyone, that you can be wildly successful, universally adored, constantly available, and perfectly healthy all at the exact same time. That is a marketing lie designed to keep you on the treadmill of exhaustion. The brutal truth is that authenticity has a body count. It requires the death of the fake relationships, the death of the comforting illusions, and the death of the version of you that was willing to betray yourself for a temporary seat at the table. Ultimately, you have to reframe the entire concept of arrogance in your own mind. We have allowed a culture of systemic burnout and emotional suppression to define the vocabulary of our mental health for far too long. We have allowed the exact people who benefit from our silence to dictate the terms of our personal growth. If taking care of your nervous system in a society that normalizes and rewards chronic stress is considered arrogant, then be arrogant. If refusing to participate in the generational trauma and the silent resentments of your family system is considered arrogant, then wear the label as a badge of honor. If having the absolute audacity to believe that your time, your energy, and your peace of mind are significantly more valuable than the fleeting approval of people who only love you when you are suffering is defined as arrogance, then let them call you arrogant. Their words hold absolutely no power in the new reality you are building. You are not shrinking anymore. You are waking up, you are stepping out of the theater of compliance, and you are leaving the masks behind on the floor. You are doing the profoundly difficult, utterly necessary, and deeply heroic work of finally becoming yourself. And that is not arrogance. That is freedom. Thank you for walking through the wilderness with me today. If this exploration resonated with where you are on your own journey, I invite you to subscribe, leave a comment below about your own experience with setting boundaries, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it right now. Stay awake, stay grounded, and as always, keep seeking the truth. This is Lucid Soma, signing off.